Well, welcome to the inaugural Doc Talk with Dr. G. I'm actually honored to share everything that I've learned in medicine, psychology, theology, and life in general. The inaugural program is actually an inside look. I'm going to take you on a journey to what it's like to dream about getting into medicine, to finally get into medicine, and to walk that journey of medical education and how it basically programs you to practice a certain way. And that's why you see so many medical doctors following the same script, if you will, pun intended, the same narrative. They seldom challenge authority or regulators, at least nowadays, not even permitted to. But it's really an exciting journey because there are certainly highs and then there are lows. And I just want to literally talk you through this as though we're walking together to a life in medicine. And of course, speaking of which, many of you we've sold about 1,400 of these life in medicine books, and much of what I talk about today will be discussed in the book Life in Medicine. And I'm just also letting you know that you can order them now. We have actually um, a new email address specifically dedicated to Doc Talk. So here it is. Here, just gonna scroll this down below. It's Doc Talk with Dr. G at gmail.com. And these programs will be live. Some will be partially pre-recorded, but the whole point is to be authentic and to be real. And so the program will be 30 minutes in length, and we'll be discussing current topics in health and wellness. I'll be talking alternative to organized medicine, if you will, and also we'll be discussing questions that you have specifically. Many of you message me asking some really great questions, and I love to do evidence-based medicine. I did a lot of that at McMaster University and published several papers. So I like to walk through questions with you, with my friends and with listeners. And so you'll be able to email me those questions and we'll address them to you. It is right up off the bat, it will be listener supported. I mean, I love what I do. I do most of it voluntarily, but for this to be sustained, I really humbly ask for your support. If you like the program, obviously, I want to give you the best value possible. And again, all communication can be done through Doc Talk at Doc Talk with Dr. G at gmail.com. So without any further ado, let's dive into the world of medicine. So we're going to actually take you through a slide presentation. And I basically put this together for this program. And essentially, it's going to be walking you through the world of organized medicine from start to finish, and then how I can see now what I couldn't see before, having basically looked at it from the outside in. So I've entitled the talk, The Road to Recovery from Organized Medicine, Unwiring Years of Programming. So I love this quote by C.S. Lewis, a brilliant Christian philosopher from Oxford University. And he says that education without values, as useful as it is, seems to make man a more clever devil. An emphasis on without values and a more clever devil. In other words, one has to be very careful with education, with getting a paper. And you'll see as we walk through this journey that getting a paper comes with baggage, if you will, of programming, of indoctrination. And so one has to be very careful to maintain ethics and values, of course. And this, of course, we've seen in the last few years. So this is a childhood dream on a father's team. I call this a childhood dream on a father's team. This part of my journey as a very small child growing up in Egypt. So technically, I am a descendant of King Tut. King Tut, of course, was a very famous king in Egypt, and so I kind of put I put my face into King Tut's wardrobe because I feel some kind of a bond. And also, I do walk like an Egyptian. Many people say that I have a funny walk. So I always say, well, I just walk like an Egyptian. So descendant of King Tut, born and raised in Egypt for the first 10 years of my life. And this is my family. My father, his name was Aziz, incredibly supportive. Many of you have read the book and saw how he just spoke words of affirmation to me as a child. Imad, you're going to be a great doctor. As soon as he found out I wanted to become a doctor, he just spoke those incredibly powerful words. That's me there. I was a little chubby kid. I was well fed and also treated very well, like King Tut. This is my sister Laurice. My brother is holding me. His name is Adel. He's passed since this picture, of course, sadly. And this is me as a child in Egypt. And I was always keen on academics. I love studying. I had this little briefcase that I carried along with me, probably oversized, but I loved studying and I had a passion for going into medicine. I really feel it was some kind of a calling because I didn't know where it came from. I just, at the age of 5, I just said to mom and dad, I want to be a doctor. I know I want to be a doctor. So we immigrated after the Six-Day War in 1967 and arrived by KLM to Pearson Airport in 1970. And here we are, my siblings and I, in 1970, having arrived to this land of milk and honey. And Canada was always incredibly sought out country. It was really seen as the gold standard at the time. So then medical school, the childhood dream fulfilled. So after a psychology degree, a bachelor's degree in psychology, and after 2 attempts, I got into McMaster University for health sciences. And of course, McMaster is very renowned. It's one of the highest rated universities for medical school. And right away from day one, we got into problem solving. We started seeing patients right away. And we did learn anatomy and physiology, but very quickly, I realized that much of medicine was going to revolve around prescribing, was going to revolve around diagnosing disease and prescribing medications for the disease. And so that became really embedded into the psyche that this is the gold standard, that health care can only be delivered through medical doctors. Medical doctors were the only ones that had the authority to take care of our health. And you see much of this spilling into people's psyche today. And we were really taught to discredit anybody else looking after health. Naturopaths, osteopaths, homeopaths, chiropractors. There was a veiled message as well as a very overt message that these were not credible professions. And so that gets in your head after a while. So you look at everyone else looking after health with a great deal of skepticism and cynicism and discredit them right off the bat. That's the default mode, is you discredit them. So really not open at all to any other allied healthcare options. So basically we're learning pills, how to prescribe pills for infection, pills for pain, pills for diabetes, pills for hypertension. It all revolved around pills. There was a very small amount of prevention, but it was extremely underrated. Of course, we were taught very early during medical school to memorize the vaccine schedule for children. So now we see that hepatitis B starts right at birth. And then we carry on with diphtheria, with measles, mumps, and rubella, with flu, now varicella, hepatitis A. And this was embedded in our brain without question. We never questioned the safety and effectiveness of vaccines. We were just told to memorize the schedule. At no point in medical school or family medicine training did I get exposed to literature to critically appraise the effectiveness of vaccines. We were just to memorize them. And you can see here, obviously, a very robust schedule to memorize. And we were not to question at all. Surprisingly, very little time was spent on natural immunity, on T cells and B cells and memory cells and antibodies. We had minimal exposure to that. And when we were exposed to anything to do with immunity, there was always a syringe involved. There was always a question about vaccination. Well, did they get vaccinated? Are they up to date on vaccination? So vaccination became really embedded in the entire immune response, that basically without vaccines, you weren't fully immune to many, many diseases. So again, very early on, this happened very early on in medical school. Now, the next phase is big pharma, the lure of physician rewards. So I learned very early, even in medical school, the influence that big pharma industry had on our education. And probably now I realize it even more than ever. At the time, it kind of sneaks in on you, and you actually, for much of medical school and early parts of my medical career, I thought big pharma was actually a good guy. They were actually sponsoring us and helping us with our education. And my first exposure to big pharma sponsorship and rewards was this incredible restaurant. Many of you maybe have gone there. It's Ancaster Old Mill. And this was a restaurant basically surrounded by natural waterfalls. It was definitely high-end fine dining. And so as a medical student, you can imagine what it's like. You're basically living in poverty. And now a pharmaceutical company treats you to a multi-course meal. And I mean, it was multi-course. So many of the medical students like didn't eat for 24 hours before, because we knew this was coming and we could never afford this kind of food. So it was definitely a situation where we probably bordered on gluttony if we didn't actually cross the line. I mean, filet mignon, like massive filet mignon, all kinds of seafood, desserts. Here's like a plethora of dessert options that we had. And of course, we left there stuffed, and it was associated with medical education. There was a specialist that would teach us about drugs. And of course, always the pharmaceutical rep was there, and he would take care of the bill at the end. So walk in, walk out, you didn't pay a penny, and you got this incredible fine dining experience paired with education. So we never questioned that this was true. What the consultant was telling us was true and credible. And now, of course, in retrospect, as you read in my book, we've learned that much of the time the big pharma studies that the specialists share are suspect. And there are even peer-reviewed rings that present papers specifically to elite journals that are laced with conflicts of interest and in many cases even fraud. But of course, at the time, you just thought this was an incredible dining and educational experience. And of course, being a hockey fan, the pharma rep who knew that took me to Maple Leaf Gardens, and there was a group of us when they launched an anti-reflux medication, Losec. They took us, but it wasn't just normal seats, it was actually box seats. So you had an incredible view of the game. This was Maple Leaf Gardens at the time, of course, paired with a meal and paired with a talk. Once again, there was a talk associated with these incredible experiences, and the talk was focusing on promoting that specific drug for the pharmaceutical rep. So I've been to the Chateau Laurier when I was doing bariatric surgery or weight loss surgery. I was treated to basically like all-inclusive experience at Mont Tremblant, and it was incredible, like heated pool outside. And then we would have, of course, again, the best of facilities. Big Pharma did not spare expenses, and swimming pool, indoor, outdoor swimming pool, and then incredibly luxurious conference centers where we were taught about the particular program. So in this particular case, it was dealing with weight loss surgery or the lap band procedure. Now, big pharma and politics. Over time, I started learning that there was a catch and there were some red flags. As I got more mature in my surgical career, I started to realize that there is a catch when you get treated and when you have the luxuries and when you experience these rewards of big pharma. There is a catch. So this is an example. So we were taught, and I was beginning a program in lap band surgery. So it's literally a silicone tube that goes around top part of the stomach and creates a sensation of satiety or satisfaction with a very small portion. So people lose weight. It's pretty predictable. It's fairly successful. There are certainly failures with it, but it's literally a silicone tube. Now, the silicone tube, I learned after we were treated to Dallas and Mont Tremblant. Both of those experiences were incredibly luxurious, that the company was going to charge me, when I started the practice at LabBen, $5,000 per tube. $5,000 for a silicone tube. And I questioned the rep, the medical devices rep, and I said, like, how can you justify $5,000? Like, what could it cost you? Like $10, maybe $20? It's like basically it's a silicone tube. Oh, and he justified it by, well, you have research and development, and we have the educational component. But the numbers just didn't add up, because I figured, well, after certainly 2 or 3 LabBens, I've already paid for that luxurious Mont Tremblant experience and the Dallas experience. So there's obviously a catch. So I got the luxury, but now I'm making the company huge profits. And I tried over and over again to negotiate some pricing as I got larger and larger numbers, but they hung tight. It's $5,000 per band. So I estimated in my program that, having operated on about over 200 patients, that we made that company about $1 million or over $1 million from a silicone tube. So obviously there's a catch to the reward. $5,000 for a piece of tubing. Another experience where I learned that there was politics in hospitals and CEOs and hospital leadership was when laparoscopic surgery was first introduced for gallbladder removal. So basically, instead of a large incision and 6 weeks of recovery and lots of time off work, we were now able to do it through keyhole surgery. So this was in the early 90s that it started. So being really research oriented, I decided to do a study on the benefits, the cost-saving benefits, if we were to send patients home the same day. And the study I presented to the leadership of the hospital. And the intent was to say, okay, let's take this money and shift it over to help our OR wait times. And I thought, well, this was basically a no-brainer. But what I discovered was all that money savings was never put back into funding healthcare. I don't know where it went, to be quite honest. And yet, the CEO in the hospital took advantage of this innovation, took advantage of the study that I had done for publicity. Basically, presented that CBC came, Global came, and they presented this innovation of new surgery and the cost savings, but none of it benefited the patients in the end in this particular experience. So that's another red flag, where there was a disconnect between what was sent by the hospital publicity-wise in order to raise more funds from the public and what actually was put back and invested into healthcare. There was definitely a disconnect there. So I realized there was a lot of politics going on. And then I share in the book this experience. This is the Ottawa Heart Institute. It is world-renowned. So Dr. Wilbur Keon was the famous cardiac surgeon that actually invented a mechanical heart for temporary replacement of the real heart where a patient was waiting for a heart transplant. So he became very, very renowned and actually caught the attention of royalty. And Prince Charles and Princess Diana at the time announced with very short notice that they were going to come and visit the Ottawa Heart Institute. This was 1991. So there was a problem. And the problem was, at the time, the census of the hospital was very low. They only had about 6 patients in hospital. So this was going to be very embarrassing for the media and for the hospital, that here's royalty and, they would come and see 6 patients, and it's supposed to be a busy, renowned heart institute. So what the hospital leadership did was actually they brought in fake patients, and they tricked the princess into thinking that they were real patients. So they included medical students, they included the custodial staff, they included old patients from a year or 2 years ago. So they brought all these patients in to fill the bed. So the optics for the media and for Princess Diana and Prince Charles was that the hospital was full. So here she is taking her tour in 1990 and visiting a patient that she thinks just had cardiac surgery. But in fact, you can see already the patient looks pretty well. Looks good. And, you get the photo op, but meanwhile, the patient is not a true patient. It's actually a simulated patient, a fake patient. And this was done for publicity. And so we thought it was a little bit funny, but also obviously quite deceptive and essentially fraud. If you really label it for what it is you're tricking Princess Diana into thinking you're recovering from surgery when you're not at all. And the reality was that we were entering phases years later in general medicine and in general surgery into the other extreme, where now real patients were overcrowding the hospitals. As underfunding continued, as demand for healthcare continued, we started seeing more and more hallway medicine. So we see these scenes. And the problem with this is that the hospital administration would never truly convey what was happening. So they would send out messages that the service was amazing, the healthcare is phenomenal, and of course politicians did the same thing. But in reality, this is what we were seeing. We were seeing hallway medicine. People, put in corridors, hallways, storage areas because of the overcrowding. So again, a disconnect between reality of medicine, hallway medicine, underfunded, nurses overworked, doctors overworked, operating room time delayed, and wait times unbelievably long. But the messages from the hospital and messages from politicians, we have the best healthcare in the world. We have no wait time. In fact, we'd have these physicians working for the government. They would come to us and present these PowerPoint presentations telling us how amazing wait times have been reduced. And we're like, but that's not our experience. Like, maybe referring to another planet. So there was a clear disconnect between the real experience in the hospital front lines and what the CEOs were saying. I did encounter one honest CEO, though, that took me aside one day and he said, Emad, as a CEO for several years, I can tell you that I've learned three things about healthcare in Ontario. And that's, number one, it's political. Number two, is political. And number three, it's political. So he was honest. It is highly embedded in politics and optics. And with that, unfortunately, there is deception and frankly, misrepresentation. But you see, here's the thing. Is from a standpoint of a physician, having finished training in medical school and surgical residency, really living below the poverty line. Now what happens is that you finish medical school and you start making the money. And there's brisk cash flow that comes in. Now you're seeing a lot of patients, you're working hard, some sleep deprivation for sure. But I call this section and this phase of medical career the lure of materialism. So the seductive incentive to comply. Well, this is a lifestyle of a surgeon. So I had a house on the water, beautiful house on the water. You see, with a Japanese koi pond. I won't get into how much each of these koi costs, but it's more than $100. And so you work hard. You recognize the politics. You recognize the influence of big pharma, but this is the lifestyle that you get. House on the water, a boat, fancy cars. This was a rental. I didn't actually own a Lamborghini, but I've owned very nice cars like Mercedes and Audi and BMW. That's kind of the standard for a practicing physician, particularly a surgeon. I remember the first few months of my career in Barrie, starting as a surgeon, I was driving a Buick LeSabre, and it was a fine car. It was a Buick LeSabre. It was a maroon-colored Buick LeSabre. I got so much flack for driving that. Colleagues called me like a snowbird, an old man, like you're like, this is not the car you drive as a surgeon. You drive a Mercedes, a BMW, or an Audi. And I thought that was rather arrogant. But with time, you start to live the lifestyle. You start to adapt to the lavish lifestyle. And that lifestyle is linked with compliance, is linked with obeying the regulators, is linked with complying with hospitals. And hospitals will come up with rules and regulations that you can't speak out and be critical of what's going on in frontline medicine. So you have the situation where you're embedded in these rewards. And if you diverge from the narrative, if you speak up and speak truth, criticize, critically appraise, you potentially sacrifice all of that, your profession. And we've seen that in the last 3 years, including the fine meals out that you can now afford because now you're in practice. So that's kind of a rundown of, I'm just going to stop sharing here. So that's the rundown of. Just going to stop this for now. Okay, so here we are. So that's a very brief rundown of life in medicine, if you will. So in essence, I wanted to walk you through this journey. I hope you can understand how a doctor has the road to compliance, the road to programming, and then I've taken the road to recover from that programming. And to be able to speak truth with confidence is a great feeling. It's a piece that is difficult to articulate, but it's wonderfully rewarding to be able to speak truth. Now, there are consequences, of course. There are consequences to speaking truth. There are consequences to being a critically appraising physician. There are consequences to holding up ethics that goes against the stream of the narrative, the government, the hospitals, the regulators. So in Doc Talk, my vision is to basically look at organized medicine in context. Now, it's not all bad. Like, for example, like if you have a life-threatening emergency, appendix perforates, you break an arm, you break a leg, you have a heart attack. There's, of course, benefits to seeking organized medicine's help in an emergency setting, in a surgical setting. But what I've learned is much of medicine, particularly to do with medication, is a type of programming. It's the type of programming that we are basically trained to follow like a script. You basically train to follow it like a group, and it's really a group mentality. So since leaving medicine, looking from the outside in, having basically started to deprogram everything that I learned, I'm very excited. And I think the soil is ripe for looking at taking care of our own health free of organized medicine. All the things that we can do as far as prevention. And also to look at the parts of organized medicine critically that are an issue. For example, the whole issue surrounding informed consent. I learned of a case of a lady, she's actually in the legal profession, that was simply going in for a biopsy, and in the fine print, they were going to put in a titanium as a marker prior, and it was going to stay there. And she had trouble with that. She had trouble with the fact that she's going to have titanium put in when it was just a biopsy test, and she challenged that. And I actually look forward to having her, potentially I'll be reaching out to her if she's agreeable to come in on the program as well to talk about informed consent. And of course, we've seen misrepresentation of certain treatments as safe and effective. We've seen the truth being misrepresented, if you will. And so this is part of Doc Talk, is to do critical appraisal of organized medicine. But then it's far beyond that. It's going to be exploring all alternatives to organized medicine, such as prevention, obviously nutrition, sleep, the impact of emotional and spiritual and psychological health on physical health. And there's much research on that, particularly coming from Duke University, on how things like trauma, like mental stress, can significantly impact the way that we live, how healthy that we are, and even physical symptoms and disease. So as part of the program, we'll have essentially yourself involved as the audience, as friends and listeners. You can email me questions, and we'll address those questions on air. I'll also offer like one-on-one coaching. I get asked many questions through Messenger and text and email. And I would like to make this into like a professional consultation where basically you have a question, we can have a one-on-one Skype or FaceTime or Zoom meeting and sift through those questions, look at all the literature, using my experience in clinical research, using my experience in medicine to basically dissect the issues at hand, look at the evidence and find the best available evidence and the best standard for treating that particular problem. So Thank you so much for listening. Again, the books are available. So it's Life in Medicine and also The Children Speak are the two main books that I wrote. Now, I will be, of course, humbly asking for help, and it's just the way it is for me to invest the amount of time. Like I spent several hours like preparing for this. There is also, of course, the lighting. There's the green screen. Like there's expenses involved in doing Doc Talk, and so I just ask that you would consider supporting it for a donation. I thought about this the other day, and I thought, for a donation of $30, again, to go through Doc Talk with Dr. G at gmail.com. For $30 donation, I'll promise to address your question on air. If there's a $60 donation, then we can do a one-on-one. I'll dedicate half an hour to a Skype or a Zoom session, and I'll also put in research prior to that half hour that we meet. So I have all the information for you. And then anybody who donates more than $100 toward the program will get complimentary Life in Medicine. And then anything over $150, you'll get both books as well. And that includes shipping and so forth. So I hope you will support the program. I am very passionate about this. I'm very genuine about this. But if it's going to be sustained, I would love to have this. I'm so passionate about this. I would love to have this Doc Talk as a career and be able to invest time, invest energy, and even make it more than 1 day a week. So tune in for Doc Talk, and it's going to be every Thursday at 7:30. And may you be blessed, and we'll see you again next Thursday. You can email me with any questions or comments.